Because I do feel like if even half of those people went and read her book, regardless of her approach, regardless of her presentation, her words were very truthful in terms of how her specific audience receives information. And I do think she spelled it out. Whether you agree with her or not, she touched nerves. She touched nerves because every time she said you were going to get angry, you got angry. And I noticed that when we discussed her book. Every time she would say, you will probably get angry or mad or start yelling. Joey, you would get angry and get mad and start yelling. And I was like,
well, because she's right. but you, and here's the point. I've admitted that I'm a racist. I gave you an example of my own racism, right? I have racial beliefs. I shared this story with Dax, and I'll share it with you again. I was at a conference with my buddy, Donovan, beautiful, handsome black man, always dressed to the nines, one of the most respected guys in the industry. And we were a couple drinks in possibly, and a guy rolled up in a Range Rover, and he got out, and he's this tall, handsome black guy. And he goes, Joey, is that a baller? Or is that a tech CEO? I was like, all right. Yeah, no. He goes, that's what I'm talking about, man. That's what we're up against. And I was like, wow. And then we tried to get a cab somewhere. We were up in like the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And he goes, you got to get the cab, dude. And I was like, why? He goes, they won't pull over for me.
Yeah.
And this is in the early aughts. So, I mean, those kind of things where I'm like, okay, that's where my racism.
This happens, that example about you getting the cab, this happens with Uber all the time.
Yes.
If black women, I have been deleted. If I'm at work and we all get out of a conference, everybody calls the same Uber, right? And I just use Uber, car share.
Right.
It could have been any other company. And if there is a white counterpart that is in the same place, I will see that driver accept me and then reject me. And then that same driver has just accepted her ride. And there's only one explanation for it.
Well, of course. And I guess that's the grand narrative here is that we recognize this is happening. I recognize that I'm racist with those types of thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so if I get to that conclusion on my own, it's going to benefit the culture that I'm around and or the people that I work with and or my family, because those are things that I came to on my own. And that's where the power of education comes in. If we're teaching the horrors of history, let's just say it's juniors in high school is where we start with that, or whatever. Here's what happened with our culture. Here's where racism played, a huge role in developing what we are today. Here's where Jim Crow came in. Here's where systemic racism still exists, right? That's where education is powerful. What I'm having a problem with the Robbins approach is when you tell people that they're white supremacists, that they all are, and this is across the board, all white people, all progressives. You're the worst, by the way. You're the worst because you actually think you're woke, which you're not. And if I tell you that you're racist, you get mad at me. That means you proved you're racist. It's kind of like saying, hey, have you stopped beating your wife yet? There's no good answer to that. Mm-hmm. So you can't. And if you frame these discussions around white people being racist, and if they feel defensive because you call them racist, then they're racist, there's no winning for them. And and this is what John McWhorter gets really into with his article, is that it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so people are not pushing back on this. HR departments are starting to think, you know what? This isn't working. And then there's tons of data, and I haven't reviewed all of it, but the efficacy of these programs isn't working when you go out and tell executives that they're racists. And by the way, when Ben Shapiro gets a hold of it with his audience who adores him, and as I mentioned earlier, they adore him because he's highly educated and intelligent and prolific with his language. And with a culture that actually rewards conflict, he's wonderful at that. He creates conflict.